Eskom has come under fire for its planned 16% electricity tariff increase. Municipalities, business, COSATU and its affiliated unions and even the ANC have added their voices to the discontent. But the power giant has indicated that the poor will pay less for electricity. Well, joining us in studio is Absa investment analyst Chris Gilmour. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. Now, you and I were chatting about this briefly off air. The consumers seem hard pressed on every side. You have potential petrol price hike this week. We have e-tolls, the looming electricity price increase. It seems that the cost of living is just so high.
I would say that South Africa has become a structurally very expensive economy in which to live these days. And I see that when I travel overseas, which I do about 4 or 5 times a year. If I go to many countries in Europe and the UK, I can fill a shopping basket for half the price that it costs here. And that's happened very recently in the past 3 or 4 years. I'm not entirely sure why it's happened, but it has happened. And as we were saying, the inflation stats that we get, I'm sure they're compiled correctly. I don't have a problem with that. But I just wonder sometimes about the relevance of the figures we get there. And with particular relevance to the Eskom increases we're talking here. When we get these huge increases from Eskom, which come through city power in the case of Johannesburg or whatever, they only account for a very small percentage of the inflation stats that come through every month. So as a result, it doesn't look as if it's having a huge impact on us, when in fact it really is. And we were saying earlier, electricity now is becoming a much, much larger and a very noticeable and identifiable part of our overall costs. And if you can do anything to try and reduce that, we know we must always, as South Africans, be more vigilant in switching off lights and things like that. But the big things are things like geysers and pool pumps and this type of thing. It's difficult sometimes to actually get much beyond what I'd call a residual level. But you can do it, and I would say one of the ways you can help yourself out at this point in time is to go the prepaid route, because then you take a big chunk of fixed cost out of the equation.
Now, you touched on the fact that, filling a shopping basket in South Africa is so much more expensive than elsewhere in the world. I went shopping this weekend, big mistake, because it was month end, and it just got me thinking. The queues were horrendous. More and more South Africans are living literally from paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. I think a lot of people have no real idea what their actual costs are. They know that at the end of the month they've got nothing left, or a few days before the end of the month, or even a week before the end of the month they've got nothing left. But they don't necessarily have a good handle on what their actual cost structure really is. And the only way you can do that is to go into and get an Excel spreadsheet, for example, and very diligently have a huge amount of discipline every month and go and keep all your bills and add them in and work out your fixed and your variable costs. Your fixed costs you can do very little about. I'm thinking like bond repayments, car repayments, stuff like that. But your variable costs, where you actually can cut back, that's the kind of thing you've got to concentrate on. Maybe you don't drive your car as much. Maybe you downsize to a smaller car. Maybe you get a scooter, this type of thing.
Now, we're seeing lots of protests in South Africa over wages, etc., and many of them are legitimate. We're not talking about the violence, etc., but their calls are calling for more money. But is that the answer? Having more money, do you think that will solve someone who's debt-ridden, for example? Just the problems.
You make a very good point, because the debt situation now is really not good. So many people have got debt really literally coming out of their ears. And look, it's much better regulated today than it ever was in terms of the National Credit Act. They try wherever possible to try and keep people within their limits. But it's not easy, and it's all about aspirations. If you want something, you want it now, and you don't want to have to wait for a few months or a year to actually get it. So if you get a little bit more, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to pay down that debt, or are you going to go out and buy something else? It depends what life stage you're at. If you're young, middle-aged, or old, whatever, what you're actually going to do with it, how responsible you are, this type of thing. A whole series of different ingredients. So you're not necessarily going to be more disciplined when you get more money.
And now we're seeing in South Africa a culture of bling, if I can call it that, where someone is living in a poor condition, but will drive the state-of-the-art car or have the latest cell phone, oftentimes via debt.
Oh, no, you're right. And I remember many years ago, the marketing director of SAB said to me that 30% of the people who buy premium beers, for example, that's just a kind of aspirational thing. Look at me, I've arrived. 30% of them actually can't afford it, but they'll do it because it's very, as you say, it's aspirational. And that applies through the entire consumer economy. We mustn't forget that almost 2/3 of our GDP comes from consumer spending. So it's important that we still encourage people to spend, but at the same time do it responsibly.
And very quickly, we have about 10, 20 seconds to answer this question. Do you think South African middle-class consumers will ever get a bit of reprieve where they say there's no increases and we're actually okay, we're able to save as opposed to live on debt?
Oh, yes. No, look, I don't think we should get too despondent about this. It will happen, but I think a number of things have to happen. Consumers have to become more disciplined in their approach, but secondly, we have to have much better and more sustainable high economic growth. Messing around at 2.5% isn't going to help us in this regard.
Thank you so much. To the point. Thanks for your time. I was an investment analyst at Chris Gilmour.